I hope this is recording, because if it's not, yes, it's recording. So officially welcome everybody to our second last gathering of the Magnificent Souls group for this period that we've actually been gathering, and we're going to continue with this exploration of the spiral dynamics. We're missing a few members today through illness and not being well, so to those of you who couldn't make it, we miss you. And hope you get better soon. So those are the feelings of the entire group. So I know I had a chat with Mariah offline about whether you guys had had any opportunity to do any holodyne work with the insights into the lower levels of the spiral in the last 2 weeks, but it would seem that the last 2 weeks have really been a bit choppy for a lot of people, that there hasn't been much opportunity to do that. So perhaps once we have completed the understanding and the framework of the spiral, that it will give you greater insight to go away and really play with it. In respect of looking at the immature holodynes. Hello, Bunny. You're very quiet there.
Just listening.
Okay. So by now you'd be sort of familiar with the structure of the spiral. Do any of you guys, as we get going, have any questions or any comments from the last session at all, or from what we've done so far? No?
No.
Okay, that's cool. I know Mariah did ask how the profiles were generated. What I can say to you is that the questionnaire that I used and the the scoring system, for want of a better description, was developed by a woman called Judy Nell in South Africa, who runs a business called Gear Changers, and I was one of her facilitators in South Africa. This is where I met her. It was sort of 20 years ago in South Africa when I was originally introduced to Gear Changers. So it's a partial questionnaire, because there's a lot more that actually goes with it in respect of personality add-ons, because our personalities can also influence the value system. So the scoring system is her proprietary process. So I can't share the detail of how that is actually done, but there are insights in that questionnaire. I mean, Laurie, I did laugh at yours because no, what was just so funny was that the very fact that you were asking the questions in respect of some of the blue and the red issues indicated immediately that that was not where your primary lens was. Your lens was actually higher up the spiral, so you were viewing it from that perspective. So it was just really funny to see it. You know, I kind of went, yeah, with all of those comments, it actually is not really significant.
Okay. I felt really bad because I knew I was making it hard, but I couldn't make it make sense to me.
Yeah,
I could not answer the question.
But it doesn't make sense to you, because that's not the lens through which you're actually viewing. That's why, because you're seeing it from higher up the spiral, and that was exactly what it showed straight away. So it was just really, it was just had to smile when I was looking at them. I went, that's okay. That just indicates it's exactly where you're thinking. It's actually coming from.
And I don't feel quite so bad, because I really did feel terrible. I went back over it a few times trying to make it so it would be easier on you, like Lori, just answer the questions, but I couldn't make myself answer them.
Yeah, if it's this, then it's that, and if it means this, then it's something else. No, it's okay. So yeah, I've got a slide with all of your profiles up, so we'll have a look at those a little bit later. I think what we'll do first is just go through the final 3 levels of the spiral. So we've got green, yellow, turquoise. to have a look at, and then it's sort of what are known as the transition zones, because there's many ways and many levels of awakening, you know, out there as well in the New Age community where we talk about people awakening. It's not that everybody's awakening to the same thing. There is an awakening process happening, but that awakening process is taking place in accordance with the aspects and attributes of wherever they are focused on the spiral, awakening them to the next level. So not everybody is going to awaken and suddenly be in turquoise, you know, and at that level, it's just not going to happen. So that's a bit sort of magical thinking, if you like. However, the awakening that is happening is certainly promoting the evolution and the evolvement of humanity's values and the structures of society. So let's have a quick look at green. So the minute we transition from orange to green, we start seeing and becoming aware of a bigger picture at play. So it's the first glimpses that there is something much bigger in the world than just our own or our negotiated self-interests. I mean, I think we're always engaged in negotiated self-interest to a very large degree, but we become aware of a new level of respect and the desire for a new level of harmony. So this is where the brain actually also starts changing and becoming, initiating this like more whole brain, or that transition from left brain to right brain happens as part and parcel of the process of integrating a more whole brain. So it starts opening up the right brain. So you can see that there's almost a correspondence with the 8th wave aligned with green when we think about the waves, because the 8th wave is the opening of the feminine. So it's very, very much in the green that we start seeing a lot of the, it's not just the green activists, we see a lot of the activists in this, but we start seeing a lot of the New Age teachings and the New Age individuals wanting to try and establish and understand what it's going to take to get to a new level of harmony in society, and starting to take other things into account. So we start looking at ecosystems and. So the green individual, if you like, when we are focused in this lens, could be termed the involver, because it's one who now wants to involve others in whatever activities are going on, and their values are all orientated around inclusiveness. So in the inclusiveness of ecosystems, the inclusiveness of groups, the inclusiveness of diverse religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs, so and all of those things. So the green individual is very, very much needed, because there is the value that awakens within this level of the spiral is one of caring and being aware of the less privileged. So here you see a lot of people and the processes that are initiated for raising money for starving kids in Africa. You know, that's very, very much a green value process. It's the charitable works, good works and charitable works. If you like, the charities for raising funds for all sorts of underprivileged individuals, for those that don't have. It's looking at and valuing a fair division of everything for everybody. So it's of all for all. And really looking at how the resources are distributed around the world and seeing the inequalities. So it's becoming very, very aware of the inequalities. It's very creative. So here you can see the 8th wave alignment with the opening up of the right brain and the feminine. So there is a huge creative element to this, and there's often very quick thought and action that's taken by somebody who is actually awakening and expanding within the green system. There's a strong inner sense of direction. Now, until we get to this point, until we get to green, everything is externally directed. But here we have a strong, because it's very competitive. So even when we've got red, which is an individual value, it's still there is still a competitive streak. So there is an external influence. Does that make sense in respect of driving those behaviors? The inner sense of direction that comes from green really starts coming from the conscience. So this is a real awakening of the inner spirit and the conscience within. So that's what we mean by the inner sense of direction and becoming intuitive. So you can kind of see how when that spiritual awakening starts happening, it squarely starts happening in green, the true spiritual awakening. Very, very often we see turning away from well-paid, high-status positions and people who want to follow their hearts. And of course, when we look at the colors, I think I mentioned to you guys earlier, there is such a strong relationship, although these colors in the spiral were arbitrarily allocated. There's such a relationship between the maturation and the relationship with each of the chakras. As well, as you would have noticed. So green, we're talking about the heart chakra. It is the color of expansiveness, being able to see and feel and think. So it's the real being directed by feelings and reconnecting with emotions. What stresses green is anything that threatens the harmony of the group. So it's any divisions and splits and disharmony within groups, because green actually seeks harmony at all costs. So anything that causes pollution, animal and plant extinctions, is very stressful for the green individual. And this is interesting when we start moving into yellow and turquoise, as you'll see in a moment. But the one thing that I wanted to, I'm just going to pause this because I want to pull up the detailed screen. Let's have a look. Let's just put that on the screen. New share, where is it? I think it's this one. Yeah, that's a Word doc. Okay. Yeah, you can see the Word document. So general characteristics of the green, you can see here, they care for the less privileged. They go beyond dogma and materialism. So where blue is a group value, they're very entrenched by the dogmas within society. So they're governed by very formal religious beliefs. And sort of the sects within the greater society. Green starts moving beyond dogma, which is where you get a lot of these like then loosely structured, accepting spiritual understandings that start emerging. There is a genuine concern for others. Can be crusaders and course mobilizers. So yeah, you got those that, you know, sort of fight the good fight kind of thing. Turn away from well-paid, high-status positions. Exploration is no longer external but internal. It's very introspective, strong in a sense of direction. I've mentioned the feelings. They tend to see other people's point of view. They're more open to other people's point of view. Whereas up until now, it's been very difficult for anyone in any of those fixed lenses, color lenses within the spiral, to see anybody else's point of view. Their view is the only one that exists and is actually important. Whereas green starts opening up to this. Very strongly orientated towards reharmonizing and functioning in relationships, creativity, fair division for all, and very flexible. There's a lot of flexibility in green. So you can see all of the positive characteristics. Now, what's really very interesting is the positive, negative, the possible negative aspects of somebody who is working through this particular lens. And that is very often that they may be for want of a better word, romanticization of the underprivileged. It's like, well, the underprivileged, they can't do it for themselves, so therefore we need to help them. So it becomes a real romantic ideal for the green. It's what serves to give them a sense of purpose in life. And that is where things actually can become patronizing, can be patronizing and even contemptuous. It's like, shame, look, they can't do it for themselves, and you know, look how well off we are, what can we do for them? And now this is interesting, because I want to just take you guys back to my comment on the Facebook post a couple of weeks ago, because anything that indicates that I will do it for you, I will look after you, is a green quality. Mm-hmm. It's not coming from the old soul empowerment aspect. And that post that was up, there was one sentence in there, and that triggered it, and I went, okay. And it was about, Mother Mary, haven't I always taken care of you? I kind of went, all right. and that's where I said, that's coming straight out of green. So we can sometimes listen to, and that's what happens with a lot of the channeling that goes on, is that it seems very empowering and it seems like very positive messages, but there is a patronizing, disempowering element in it that comes through in those little nuances of language. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And that is what I always listen for, and it's like there can be the message can be beautiful, and I hear that one sentence or two sentences and I go, all right, it's like, so and so will heal you. I communicate with this group, come and join me, and Metatron will heal you. Okay. And that, from my perspective, and that comes from that's really from the turquoise perspective that kind of comes in, that sees it. Yeah. And I realize that it does have value. I think it helps us to be able to see it from a different perspective when we understand the spiral. Does that make sense, guys? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's where that can be very, very patronizing when it's coming out of green. It's the I know best attitude. Disempowers by taking away responsibility. That is that giving fish rather than teaching how to fish. Can be naive and blind to life's harsh realities. It's all the fluffy angel wings and everything is love and light, and we just ignore the rest that actually doesn't fit in with our harmonized picture. Believe that all people are equal. And that's actually under a possible negative aspect. So I want you to really think about those words, because at the spirit level, we are all interconnected. But are we all equal in the sense of the word?
Not in the ability, no. When we look at the ability to affect change in our lives, yes, we are not all equal.
Exactly. Whereas green tends to view it as equality, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, without understanding those nuances and what fuels the inequality. And an old soul and a transcendental soul, they are all of equal value. Mm-hmm. But they're not of equal understanding or equal capability or equal, as you were saying, Laurie, this ability to effect personal change or effect change in the world in a positive way. They're not all equal. So it's really interesting to begin to understand the nuances around that, whereas green often doesn't. Can believe in misguided causes. So even though green starts opening up to the big picture, they can sometimes get caught up in causes which sound really good, mm-hmm, because they're seeing a slightly bigger picture than what they were, but they're not seeing the impact of that particular cause in the bigger global sense. That, it's like global warming. It's global warming. We must change the atmosphere, and we have to fix global warming. Well, excuse me, guys, we can't. Okay, so it's almost a misguided cause, mm-hmm, depending on how it's applied, because we know that there are things that we can do to clean up the environment to actually help to reduce the impact atmospherically and from the perspective of our resources. But there are cosmic influences at play with something like global warming. So those that are in green can get stuck in only one aspect of the cause, and it then becomes misguided action. Yeah. So you can see, so I just really wanted to explain that with the green, and I think you'd get it. They're stressed by disharmony, they're stressed by pollution, they're also stressed by anger and conflict. Green doesn't like any kind of conflict. So you would often find that somebody who is very, very strong in green is often low in red, because red is the power to go in and to deal from a personal power perspective very strongly with a conflict situation, whereas green doesn't like that. Green is soft, green is flexible, green wants to hear every person's point of view and won't make a decision. And in fact, one of the challenges of green is if you put a whole bunch of green people together, you're gonna have a huge job on your hands trying to get them to reach any kind of decision. because there's nobody who wants to actually take a leadership role. As well with the greens. So it's very, very much about the consensus of the group in this. And that's also really interesting to see. So you need somebody who has the strength to actually be able to stand in there and take it to the next level and say, right, the buck stops here. Unfairness, things that are perceived as unfair or unjust, and being misunderstood. And that's where you can kind of see it's more the mature souls here, but the huge swathes of mature souls actually saying that they are misunderstood, purely being misunderstood as not necessarily just old soul domain. There is a strong green influence in here, and that stresses the green individuals because they want to be able to make themselves understood, but they don't have enough cognizance of the entirety of the spiral to be able to understand where others are so that they can make themselves, to meet them where they are at, and to also comprehend that there are things that they are aware of that will not be understood by those who are further down the spiral. So they really sit with this stress, which is actually a very uncomfortable place to be. Yeah. Values, I think these are, as I said, I've put these notes up for you on the webpage. So these you will have a permanent reference to. Humanity, human and animal rights, very strong value associated with that. Participative situations, which is what I was talking about with the groups. They really highly value group participation, not just singular autocratic decision making. Acceptability and harmony. Being accepted is also a very powerful aspect of the green. Somebody who is strongly focused in green seeks acceptance by others and very often seeks validation. And the personality attributes can exacerbate this, whatever value lens is at play. Does that make sense? So there's even another layer to this that can actually be explored, because you get double whammies. So somebody who is focused in green and actually has I don't know who's familiar with the Myers-Briggs system. What would a participative personality profile be? Looking at people's personalities, somebody who likes harmony and group work and
introvert. Feeling, the F.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So you get a feeling personality operating through a green lens, and you've got a double whammy. So that person becomes ultra sensitive and super sensitive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this happens with every single layer of the spiral. So I think, that's almost another important, when we're looking at working with and dealing with individuals, is perhaps understanding where they've got those exacerbations. But even understanding the spiral gives us a great opportunity to tune into people's language, and we can begin to figure out where they're at.
Yeah.
It's just those double whammies that become really interesting. Anyway, equality, the environment must be protected from ruthless plundering. You can see how this really evolves from the orange, which is the previous layer of the spiral, which is destroy the environment for profit. Marching in protest for causes like abuse of children, save the whales, whatever it might be. Who am I? Why am I here? Opportunities, personal inner growth, that's really valuable, and individual effort to change group consciousness. So it's where people begin to develop a sense of purpose in life. My life task is to work towards whatever it might be in order to affect the change in group consciousness. So very much a green aspect, and this is really interesting because it is almost this constantly seeking for what is my purpose, why am I here, and people needing a mission, needing a defined driver for their life, a goal, something that they can actually move towards. Whereas when you start getting into the yellow turquoise levels, it's less about that. And I think we've mentioned this at other points in the group gathering, is that our purpose becomes to simply be the fullness of who we are, to reach the fullness of our own potential. So you can kind of see these differences, and we all have a lot of green in our profile. Most of us here in the group have a lot of green in our profile. It's not always the predominant value, but it does have an influence, and it is important. So it's getting the balance of those values to the point where we can express them and work with them in highly positive ways, rather than falling into the stress and the negatives. Decision making is very democratic, team orientated, consensus through consultation, based on what is fair and equal, concerned with and being sensitive to all. So you find a lot of empaths actually operate through this lens as well, because it's a very, very feeling value. So, you guys quite comfortable with that? You can see that summarized quite nicely in this little diagram as well. So you've got the positive aspects, the negative aspects, the values, and the stress factors of each individual, and that's in your document. Yep, I don't need to go through that now. You guys have got the hang of green. Any questions or observations there?
One thing that, well, a couple of things that I noticed, it seems like that's where we have been as a society for the last 20 years. Just looking at it from a corporate lens, is how we have gone from that dictatorship and hierarchy. Not that we've left that completely or even made a big impact, but a lot of the coaching, the corporate coaching, is around this idea of teamwork and harmony, seeking harmony. Just something in the one of the last things that you said just really struck me as that's really where the corporations have been trying to go. And then I equated that to the age group. It seems to me like the age group of, like, right now they're 35 to 32 are really starting to want to do more in terms of they're leaving their jobs and looking for philanthropy. So that may be that age group also that has been shifting the corporations.
Yes, and that's interesting, Laurie, because I think if we cascade back, we would find that this started becoming effective probably only in the late 30s into the 40s, was when people started shifting their perspective. So it is almost as if there's been this pressure in the spiral, this evolutionary wave and that's commensurate with the eighth wave stuff that is actually fueling that stage and that step in the evolution of the spiral at an earlier age within corporate. So that's a very interesting observation. And I think that's very telling. And yes, of course, we've got the corporations as well, in looking at things like social responsibility and having that as part of their mission statements. I don't know if they do that in the States. I know that the companies...
Yeah, but I think that's coming from, let's just put it on our webpage and say we're doing it. I don't believe that that's...
Lip service. Yeah.
That's what they think they should do.
That's exactly it. That's what they think they should do. But the time will come when they're going to be called to task on that.
Yeah.
And respect it. Well, that's what you say you're doing now. Where's the evidence? And show us. I mean, Wall Street, for instance, and all of the financial institutions are still squarely in orange. Very powerfully in orange. It's like it's the new algorithms to make lots of money. So it's technology and financial status and, you know, sort of status and wealth. So there you've got the marrying of all of those really powerful aspects of the orange. And I mean, they don't give two hoots about what's happening with the environment. So there are still massive changes to occur on the global stage, but if we can see it beginning to happen at earlier ages with individuals, it means that by the time they move up to the point where they are in the VP and the CEO positions of the corporations, given another, you know, sort of like 15, 20 years, we will begin to start seeing real change in the world, because the old school will be moving out. And this also kind of corresponds with the wave information, if you like, of Carl Kalleman, because what he's saying is that, okay, we've got the 9th wave that's building, we've got the 8th wave, which is like alternating up and down every 360 days, and then we've got the 7th wave turning into an upswing at the same time as the 8th wave is on an upswing, and we've got the 9th wave in effect from 2031, and we have never seen that combination of qualities. So that's 13 years away. And his reasoning is that's when we will see real change. So looking at this model and how we are seeing this happening, that becomes very hopeful. You know, it kind of like says, yes, it might not be happening as quickly as we would like, because when you're at the turquoise and yellow level, you've got the visionary qualities to be able to see beyond and to know what is possible. And it's like, yeah, you know, I mean, why are you so slow? Like, what's the problem? But this is a huge ship that needs to be turned around. So yes, it's accelerating, and it's really beautiful. Thanks.
What I think is so cool is how all of these different I don't know what you call these, but like the looking at the waves and looking at this particular tool and looking at the chakras and look, you know, it's just how all of them do support each other in what's really happening. And so it's not like, well, this one is saying this and this one is saying that. It's like when you look at all of them, it's like it's all making sense together, just a different way of looking at it.
And I think that's the beauty of it. Yeah, and that's the beauty of, I think, integrating this information in a slightly different way so that we can see that synergy. And it really, to me, it adds to the value of each of the individual processes by being able to see that synergistic aspect. Yeah. Which is really lovely, and I do have a feeling that there is actually more coming. That will be put into this part that goes, yes, okay, so it's really positive. Okay, so let's have a look at yellow, which is the next level on the spiral. So as mentioned previously, when we cross over that boundary, there is like a bridge between green and yellow, where yellow really is the first stage at which we start becoming more strongly whole-brained, where we value the left-brained aspects of who we are along with the creative. So there's a strong creative element and there is a left-brain element. And in yellow, what is interesting is the ability to see beyond the falsely imposed boundaries or barriers and begin to think from a process perspective and an integrated system perspective. There are not many people on this planet who are functioning wholly in yellow at the moment and functioning well in yellow. And it's those yellows that are really, really needed to help to put structures in place in society to be able to integrate all of the other levels and to make sure that everything works well. And it's the yellow guys who really become, if you like, the spiral wizards, that ability to to integrate thinking into practicalities. So yellow, while it's very integrative, and at another level, there's a lot of integration that happens internally within our bodies. So it's not just that we are bridging the hemispheres of the brain. There is a lot of integrating of what we opened up to within the green. So we opened up to spiritual understandings that went beyond the dogma, you know, and that really opens up our mind to all sorts of possibilities and potentials. But it's only in the yellow where we begin to integrate all of this at the cellular level, really through the nervous system, through every aspect of our being. So it's a lengthy process almost to fully integrate all of this within yellow. So we can see individuals who are strongly focused on the values through the yellow lens, but still not yet able to apply, because they are still busy integrating, apply the knowledge and apply the wisdom, because they're integrating it within themselves. So it's a very individualistic process, but also very practical when it's taken back out. So it's quite an interesting place to be, is in the yellow. So yellow individuals, or those who are focused in yellow, who've made that quantum leap into the next stage, what is positive about them is that they handle change very well. So they're able to, because there's been a level of integration within their being, they're able to navigate the transition and be very flexible. So you've got the flexibility of the green with a bigger understanding, and integrative thinking means that they can move through change more easily than any other value system. The positive aspect is that they see integrated systems, and it's just really interesting that we're talking about this, and this is what we are doing within this group, and there's a lot of high yellow within the group. So there's a lot of integration that's actually happening. It believes in dispersal of power. And this is interesting because yellow, from a chakra point of view, from our personal point of view, we know it's the solar plexus, and we usually refer to that as the seat of personal power. And it has been said that that is the final chakra to fully mature in our body. So because of what everything that it takes to be able to step into and be in our personal power with a full sense of responsibility and as a fully integrated human being. So it's a very powerful place, and that yellow chakra is very powerful. However, yellow, as an individual, one who is focused in yellow and is positive, believes in dispersal of power. So it actually believes in giving other people their power back. I am not. All the others seek to take power from others in some way, shape, or form. Yellow wants to give it back and empower others. It does not hold on to anybody else's power or manipulate in that respect. Yellow is very rarely fearful, and if we think about it as well, you know, where is it that we feel it in our body when we begin to feel fear and anxiety? It's in the solar plexus. So when that is fully integrated and fully developed, we very rarely feel fear over anything, no matter what it is that happens in our lives. It accepts other people for who they are. So it's not a case of seeing everybody as equal. It's like, you are who you are, and that is absolutely wonderful. So it accepts others for who they are, has very big picture views, very creative from a problem solving perspective. So the yellows tend to be some of the problem solvers on the planet, and they are more whole-brained. Now, in the profiles that I actually did for you, there's a predominance in the right brain, but there is enough in the left brain as well. That is still the carryover, I think, from the transition through green in respect of where we're at. So there's a lot of integration that's actually happening from the brain perspective at the moment. And that's why also one of the reasons why the brain balancing program is really valuable, because that builds the corpus callosum and the hemispheric links. in order to ensure whole brain thinking. So there you have, yellow is really powerful, and can have a really, really positive impact on the world. Their values, what they value is that they are non-conformists. So anybody who's strongly focused in yellow does not like to conform to anybody else's idea of what they think they should be. So this is where you kind of get the rebel instincts. Non-competitive, it doesn't compete against anybody else. Yellow is really interesting because, again, we've got this self-worth issue associated with the solar plexus. So from a competitive perspective, it's almost as if yellow competes against itself. So yellow is constantly striving for self-improvement. So there is almost an internal competition. Does that make sense? So it's not competitive externally. Very often yellow, when it is strongly developed, does not compare itself to other people. Instead, it becomes an internal.
So it's like an inner drive, because there's a knowing that there's more, so that the drive becomes stronger to reach that.
Yes.
That we sense that something more. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. And very often that does kick in as low self-worth. Because I know that there's more, I am not perfect. And somehow, depending on our thinking and other influences and any immature holodynes that may be there, that can then influence the sense of value with where we are at this moment.
So that would, I'm just going to repeat what you I think you just said, so that would actually reach in and magnify those final areas of insecurities, so that we can draw them out for completion.
Yes, good way of putting it. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, so it is like a magnifying lens on all of those.
Cool. Yeah,
that's part of the integrative process. Thank you, Laurie. That's a beautiful way of wording it. So yellow values self and the world. So it's not either or, whereas all of the other value systems before this are either or. It's either valuing self or the world, or the community, or whatever the value system happens to be. It values competency. So this is about, it's less about what you know, and it's the application of what you know in respect of your level of competence to be able to do something. So if you want to stress a yellow in a work environment, for instance, give him a boss who's actually incompetent at leading people. Boy, yeah, and I had that situation. And what I did, it was that total nonconformist. I'm not going to play it your way. And it was really interesting what kind of transpired, because I had this manager and I was actually doing things and creating. We were at the time at this company going through, I think it was a 60th birthday celebration for the company. So I'd taken an idea from a previous company and said, well, let's have a wonderful birthday party and we'll invite our clients and customers and we'll do this and we'll do that. And I called in the consultant who I'd worked with previously, and we got it all structured. And then my boss chips in, who'd been put in that position because he'd been sidelined from another company within the group because of sexual harassment. And my boss chips in and wants me to sign the letters going out to the customers from him. And I thought, sorry, I've already sent the letters out. I hadn't, but I thought, I'm damned if I'm going to do that. and that's the kind of thing that you actually find with yellow. It is that rebellious, I'm sorry, I'm not buying into to that structure, and I'm not going to comply with it. So very interesting. It values responsibility, and that's personal responsibility, so that we each take responsibility for what is actually happening in our environment, in our lives. And that's not in a harsh way, but it just understands that personal responsibility is an aspect of growth. And it strongly values freedom of choice. And so in a work environment, for instance, the yellow individual is likely to say, this is what I want you to do. There's the framework. That's the end result. And here are a couple of guidelines. I don't care how you do it. You choose how you do it. As long as it's ethical and all of the rest of it, go and do it. The thing is, you can only do that if you're dealing with a yellow individual. You can't do that if you're dealing with a blue individual, because blue can't do that. Blue needs everything written down step by step by step and a procedure to do it, because blue cannot think that way. And this is where you do find some of the conflict between individuals. And that's just a work environment example. You know, you could be dealing with these individuals in real life. So all of us that are in yellow, because we value that, there's often a tendency to assume that others will be able to pick up, you know, what we actually hand over to them. And many of them can't. You know, and that's not a patronizing statement. It's a statement of awareness. And consciousness. So it's really, really important. Yellow starts carrying a huge responsibility in respect of supporting the other levels of the spiral to help other individuals to make them whole. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
To heal those. So it is quite a level of responsibility that yellow has. Now, where this starts getting negative and challenging, which is really interesting, one of the things that I learned along the way is that yellow can be so, well, you do your thing and I'll do mine. Okay. That yellow can see that there are solutions to problems and different ways that things can be done, but because it's so mired in this you do your thing, I'll do mine, it can step back and just let everybody else get on with it, rather than bringing the wisdom forward. So yellow can very, very often just step back and sit on the sidelines and go, I'm much more comfortable in my own space, you know, rather than trying to convince others how to do things. But yellow has such value to add to groups, to families, to society, that it's almost... what's the word? It's almost sacrilegious for them not to bring that out and to share it with others, to apply what it is that they know in respect of the external environment. So they can also be hugely absorbed in self-interest, because they're very, very aware of the integrative process that is actually taking place. And it's kind of like, wow, and you sort of look at this and look at where you are relative to the rest of the world, and can become very, very self-absorbed in expanding and balancing the brain, and in, you know, sort of matching up left brain and right brain stuff. There's a whole lot of... what's the word? Yeah, it can just become very personally self-absorbed in respect of building up one's own value and one's own strength and one's own power. Okay. And, you know, we can all sit around and solve the problems of the world over the dinner table.
I feel like that is... because that's a lot of work. When you can see so clearly everything underneath, and you just know, but the idea of trying to communicate in a way that the oranges and the greens and the reds and the blues are to even to get them to move is so much effort.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's why the yellows tend to just say, I'm just going to sit here and let you do your thing, because it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yes, it is. But I think because yellow tends to see it all, it takes the burden of it all. Whereas I think what yellow can choose to do is to apply what they know in chunks or in specialist areas or with small groups, and with the understanding that those small groups are becoming part of a groundswell grassroots movement that is feeding into the whole. And I think that's where we need to refocus and realign and then reapply some of the energy. So it's perhaps working with small groups to begin with, and letting that filter in. It's an incredible amount of work. Incredible. I've got a friend who's just developed, it's also an integrated process for culture change that impacts on companies' bottom lines within the corporate environment, but using archetypes. And she's very, very strongly in yellow and turquoise, very strongly centered. And her work colleague, she's got her own little consulting business, have just spent 7 months of such intense work developing this model to be able to language it. I mean, her and I have had loads of discussions to language it in such a way that they could impact the individuals and impact the organization. And the results were absolutely astounding. Mm. And it is still beyond the comprehension of some of the members of the exec. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like they cannot understand how it was done. However, what they cannot deny is that the results were measurable. And that is her in. But I cannot tell you, Laurie, how much work. I stayed with her for 2 weeks before I actually left the UK. And I know it was like from like 9 in the morning on Skype with a work colleague working through stuff. And when they were in the middle of the project, they were actually refining and building and creating the tools as they actually went along. Incredible amount of work. And it's by no means finished. So yes, you're right. And that can be daunting. So daunting that some people, depending on the personality aspects and the other mixes in the pot, just don't even take the first step forward. Yeah. So there's huge potential, and I think there are ways for each one of you, and that's what Mariah and I were saying earlier, is that for each one of us, we've all come to this from different roots, and having different systems and different approaches that we have used. Is that the beauty of where we're all at the moment, is perhaps seeing our own unique way of integrating information to be able to apply it in the circumstances and in the environments that we are in. So this is my way of actually seeing a whole lot of things feeding in, as we were talking about earlier. It's huge, and I'm sure there is stuff that you have done up until. Well, I know there is. It's not just I'm sure. I know there is that you've done, Laurie, that you can feed into, perhaps structuring in a different way to take out in a different way.
Well, there was, and it was very comfortable for a long time. I mean, I've been coaching for 15 years now, yeah, and it was very comfortable. And those who going through this is really just so interesting, because what I see is that I always said that. I got the message that I was here. It's changed now, and that's why I'm trying to figure out where I'm fitting in. But yeah, what I was here to transform lives by awakening potential, but really, or by awakening consciousness. I said awakening potential, but yeah, it was really by awakening consciousness. And what I'm seeing is that the people that, and I said it's a very specific group of people that I coach, a very specific group of people who were attracted to me. The others were just totally turned off by me, and what they were these ones that were going from orange to green. And the oranges are totally turned off by me, but I didn't have the languaging around it. I just thought they were very left-brained, but now I get they were orange or below, not below, but or a different color. I was coaching the greens, the orange to green, the greens, and the yellows. Yeah. Lately, in the last couple of years, I've been coaching mostly greens, yellows, and I've got a couple who I would guess maybe we haven't talked about turquoise yet, but potentially in the turquoise. Yeah. But the last 2 years, I'm just starting to regain some sense of energy over this last month or so. But for about a year and a half, I was literally dead in the water. I was so drained, just empty.
Yep.
And I didn't know how to get it back. And I'm just starting to get some energy back and some sense of life and some sense of purpose. So
I think what's interesting is that each time we go through sort of one of our shifts, or there's, because there are so many cosmic factors at play, quite literally, with the energetic influences of the environment, that is fueling such huge readjustments within. And each time we do that, there's a new level of integration that happens. And yellow is very good because yellow can focus on self and the world, but it may mean as well that yellow is easy at taking itself out of the world in order to complete that integration process and to then move back out. And I think that's exactly where you've been because of the energy coming in. So that new level of integration is really going to align things for you in a completely different way.
Yeah. I was a year ago, the summer, so this is 2017, so the summer of 2016 when it started to come on, and it was so unlike me because I'm a doer, but I just started just doing nothing. And I was leading groups at the time, and I quit. I couldn't do it anymore. I was just empty.
Yeah.
And so since the summer of 2016 all the way through this summer, but like I say, just this last month or so, I'm starting to regain some of that. Part of me thought it was reintegration. I mean, I even started to think it was a depression. I didn't know, or dark night of the soul, or I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and I think that is actually part of it, because when we're actually internalized and when those shifts are taking place, there is almost a dark night of the soul, because at another level, we're dying to parts of ourselves that we're letting go of. So it's like a massive detox. It's a massive reevaluation. It's a massive adjustment. I mean, you look at somebody who transitions from orange to green. And I mean, we've seen it. We've probably been there at some point in our lives as well. And it's usually through massive illness. You know, that whole shamanic initiation as well. It's usually through a massive illness that forces the transition, and how long it takes for those adjustments to settle. Mm-hmm. So at yellow, it's almost like there's lots of micro adjustments also continuing to take place within this level until it becomes something really solid.
Got it.
Yeah. And it does take up a lot of energy at the cellular level for that to happen. So yeah, very, very powerful stuff. Okay. So what would stress the yellow individual would be excessive structures. Okay, especially where it is, putting things in boxes, because yellow wants all those boundaries broken down, and you got a box, and you can't see beyond the confines of that box. That yellow is going to get very stressed. Dysfunctionality. So it's not about harmonization. It's about things not flowing properly, being dysfunctional. Within any kind of system. It's like just, kind of like step back and just take a look at this big, if you did this, then that would happen. And if you did that, then that can happen. And you can create a whole new process. So anything that's dysfunctional is going to stress yellow, because they can see the potentials. So that's where a lot of us are at also with all of the yellow, because we can see the potentials. It's like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you see it? Anything that is fragmenting, that breaks things up into its pieces, component pieces. So fragmentalization, blocks in flow, and lack of principles. Because of the value of competency and responsibility and freedom of choice, there's a strong principle aspect to yellow. Yellow values individuals who stand by their principles. It's not standing by a cause, it's standing by their own principles, and they've usually been able to reason through why they hold those principles so dear. Okay, so they can usually vocalize and explain why. And so also, you know, if yellow comes across individuals who actually lack principles, who are, you know, easily dissuaded or easily manipulated, if you like, by other people, that's a lack of strength in their own personal principles, and that stresses the yellow individual. So there you have. So it's a very, very interesting place to be. And it is interesting because so often people look at the spiral and it becomes an ambitious goal to reach the high levels of the spiral. You know, again, there's very often this hierarchical view of the spiral, and to some degree there is a natural process of development from one level to the other. But I think what's important to remember is that we all have all aspects of the spiral within us, and that these goals are the higher up you go, the more expansive your perspective becomes on the spiral, the more responsibility you actually carry for maintaining and working with your energy in a responsible way so that it actually benefits self and the world. So it is kind of like yellow does and can carry a lot on its shoulders from a different perspective, and there's a lot of personal responsibility that goes along with it. And a lot of people, you know, so who may be sort of lower down the spiral don't perhaps understand that. Okay. Any other questions or comments on yellow? You guys all right? Okay. So while we're here, you've got those in the notes. I'm not actually going to go through those because you will relate to it. There was just something that I saw here. Yellow individuals, those who are strong in yellow, can be very strategic in their thinking. Mm-hmm. They're very good at strategizing because of their ability to decompartmentalize and look at the flow. I don't know where I actually just saw that. Strategy. I don't know. I must have thought I saw it. It must have been important to say that. Yellow is also about personal integrity, which goes along with the principles and personal integrity. Really important. So let's have a look at turquoise, and which is as far as we're going to go in the spiral, because the emerging coral, which is the next level, is just, it's a sliver. It's like a glimmer of light at the moment. It's not even really anything that is prevalent on the planet at the moment. It's kind of like a promise, if you like. There's a hint of that energy, which is a part of the ninth wave, but there's no way that coral as a spiral level is really emerging at the moment. So even turquoise, you know, sort of yellow, turquoise, yellow, there's quite a few yellows. Yellows don't often have the spiritual understanding. Yellows not necessarily spiritually orientated. In fact, a lot of the individuals, just to mention this, they operate on the basis of integrity and principle, but they don't necessarily have a spiritual foundation for what they do. They tend to be atheistic or agnostic. Okay, so they've broken through the green. They've perhaps looked at all of these others and broken out of the dogmas of the early levels, but they tend to be agnostic. In other words, they don't know. What's important is the personal integrity and the personal principles, not necessarily fueled by a higher spiritual consciousness. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we get to turquoise, now turquoise becomes inclusive at a much broader perspective. This is where almost the a deeper understanding of spirituality and consciousness comes into play, because it's looking at how, like the Nassim Harameins of the world that explores how physics shows us, and the structure of the ether and the minutiae almost demonstrates that there is a divine creative force at work in the world. So it's a higher understanding of what spirituality actually is, and of the spiritual force and the spiritual essence.
So can I just ask, higher understanding of what spiritual is as compared to maybe the religious kind of spirituality?
Yeah, religious, and even the green. Because to a large extent, turquoise and beyond almost goes beyond the like the reliance on ascended masters and the channelings and all of, does that make sense? And all that sort of stuff. Into the field.
Yeah, it's almost okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if we think in terms of chakras, we develop the personal power, the yellow. Turquoise takes us up to what we know or might think of as the high heart. So it's that between the heart center and the throat, which is green and blue, combined connects with the high heart, which is the transcendental heart, and that is generally known as being the color of turquoise. Okay, generally accepted as being that color. So what is positive about turquoise? Well, turquoise, the individual who is focused through the lens of turquoise is known as the eccentric individualist. Okay. So even though they hold values which are group orientated, they are, from an individual perspective, it's almost like so far out in respect of the beliefs and the values of the rest of society that you might get like one turquoise individual in the middle of society. So they, certain cultures and environments, like one here and one there and one there. So they are the eccentric individuals. Okay. Because they are essentially global citizens. And in fact, I would even go further than that and say they're kind of like cosmic citizens. Yeah.
And that would be an individual who is primarily turquoise you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Primarily, yeah. So turquoise sees the whole picture at once. So you can see how this sort of continues and develops from yellow. Turquoise sees the whole picture at once. Has a broad spectrum of interests. So has a huge range of things that they are interested in. So you might find that they are interested in astrology and cosmology and integrative thinking and understanding the psychology of individuals and the physics of consciousness. And do you know what I mean? So it's like a really broad range of interests that you will often find turquoise has, rather than being confined to a relatively defined band. They are in tune with large-scale planetary concerns. There is a respect for all of life and the implicit order within the universe. And this is interesting. I was talking about the difference between green and turquoise, because green gets stressed by extinctions and pollution and all of the rest of those things. So turquoise, when it gets to this point, can almost see and understand that there is an order that is unfolding from a universal perspective, which necessitates the passage through these situations. Yeah.
So there is no right or wrong, good or bad. there's a purpose for everything. There's a force behind and within everything that shows up, that causes what we see in our world. And to sit and complain about it isn't helping. There's no reason to do that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, to a point, because even within turquoise, you know, I hear expressions as well, such as transcending duality. Well, when we look at the structure of the universe, there is an implicit order and there's an implicit duality in the universe. There's a left hand and a right hand.
A balance.
There's a balance in the universe. Yeah, there's a central axis, and on each side of that axis, you find galaxies that spin clockwise and galaxies that spin anti-clockwise. So at the universal level, at the big picture level, we live in a universe that is actually polarized. So from that perspective, there is right and wrong. But we serve as the bridge between those polarities, and have a different perspective in respect of how it unfolds, if this makes sense. We've got right and wrong in respect of societies which led to the legal system, which is in blue. We've got right and wrong in respect of dealing with the environment and all of life, which is what we see unfolding within green. So we still have a right and wrong. Within turquoise, there's a rightness about what is unfolding, but it still recognizes behaviors that do not serve. Does that make sense? So it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, is that I feel like at that level and listening with that perspective is that I think you're right, Lori. It isn't that you sit and complain, you see the bigger perspective. But my thought was, and I think this is, Julie, what you were saying, is that there's also that integrity of what you don't just accept it. You personally, the one thing I can think about is like politics. The big thing has been stand for what it is you believe in, but first and foremost, look at it within yourself. You're not going against, but you realize, I mean, I believe that it's happening for a reason, but I'm not going to not do anything about it. You know, I'm not going to just, like my husband just goes nuts over it because he's so conservative, but I see that it's evolving. So what do I need to do within myself? And what do I need to do as within my community, or what will I do that leads to greater evolution of what's going on the planet?
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Bonnie. That's also well put. Thank you. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's also, what I love is like Andrew Harvey, for instance. Andrew Harvey talks about sacred activism.
Yes.
So it takes the activism of green to a whole new level. That is activism from a turquoise perspective, because we're doing it. We've already are holding the yellow lens. You cannot have high turquoise without high yellow, in respect of how the spiral evolves. You will have developed the essence of that personal integrity and the principles for which you stand, and that the activism that is then undertaken is done from a completely different perspective than the green. Green activism in green, because it is wrong, leads to burnout, whereas activism in turquoise is done from a perspective of centered principles, and, as you say, Bonnie, the understanding of the greater evolutionary impulse or imperative.
Well, it just reminds me of the whole discussion I remember years ago in yoga class talking about Hitler, and was that really wrong or right? And I mean, I remember the debates around it, but there's a much bigger picture for the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to accept that what he did was okay. But on the other hand, there was an evolution that occurred around that.
This is, that's interesting. And this is also where we start entering into the territory of some of the paradoxes. As we've spoken in the Old Souls group about the paradoxes. Paradoxes is in the turquoise realm. And that's why, you know, sort of turquoise is the true domain of the real old souls, because you become comfortable with those paradoxes, or more comfortable with them, that there is technically a right and a wrong, because the entire universe is polarized, but it's not a judgment of other individuals in a sense, but it's about the right and wrong that we feel within ourselves, which then drives our behavior in respect of supporting evolutionary change. Does that make sense? I can see Laurie looking and going,
Well, I don't know. 90% of the time, if I follow something far enough, I can see that it's not right or wrong. It's only when I apply my idea, my values to it,
yes,
that I can then judge it as right or wrong. But as Bonnie said, you know, even Hitler, something came out of that, an evolution came out of that. And then I also have a belief that, you know, whether anybody else has this belief or not, I have a belief that all of us came here to agree to something, and those who were part of that, as awful as it sounds, did they have an agreement to play a role in that?
yeah,
Yes.
So I still am not convinced that there's no right or wrong. I mean that there's right or wrong.
I'll tell you, in yoga, they said there was no right or wrong.
well,
Good
what's
choice, bad choice.
interesting is, let's just take it from an internal perspective, is that in turquoise, we begin developing a deeper connection with our own spiritual source, which becomes our guiding beacon. So the right or wrong there is, if you like, based on the level of trust that we have on that internal navigator that points us in the directions that are right for us. So the more strongly we are integrated within turquoise, and the stronger our connection with our source becomes, the more the imperative for us to act upon what is right for us. So, and what is right for us, if we are following that guidance, becomes right for the world and the way that things are evolving. So it's almost a very subtle difference, because we can choose to ignore that voice, and in that instant that we do that, we might undertake a behavior that we perceive as wrong because it's polarized. It's not what we were guided to do. And yet there is an opportunity to learn as a consequence of that behavior. So ultimately it is right. And there's a huge paradox that exists around this.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That polarization still exists in a different way, because the entire universe is polarized, and yet it is all being driven in the direction of evolution and unfoldment.
Well, it's the whole thing about one end of the continuum or the other.
Yeah, it's on the same continuum. Yeah. Sit with it. Because the one thing about turquoise as well is that sometimes the concepts and the understandings are very difficult to language. And it's just something that you work with. So I'm also not saying that your understanding is right or wrong. We're all sitting in this particular value system. So there's a vast awareness of these principles and the way that we apply them in our lives. In fact, you know, this whole group is rich in respect of these principles. So let's work with it, sit with it as a group. And it's like whatever your understanding is absolutely fine, because turquoise understands the mega systems. And there we're talking about the cosmic, the universal, the evolutionary, and the unfoldment of the systems. And it is, to a large extent, very whole-brained. What is interesting as well, because it's one of the things that I've discovered, is that species over past evolutionary leaps that have taken place in consciousness that are aligned with the different waves, if you like, that have led to the emergence of these values. Each time there has been an evolutionary leap, there has been sort of extinction events where certain large groups of species have disappeared. To this day, the archaeologists still cannot fully explain why across the globe the dinosaurs all disappeared at the same time. But there are major extinction level events of large swathes of species, and the last one happened about 40,000 years ago. And within a relatively short geologic period in time, there is an emergence of new species without seemingly the transitionary stages in between. So you get an energetic, and each one of the evolutionary changes has been accompanied by massive changes in space weather, in the way that Earth is relative to the space environment, to the cosmic environment, which has led to energetic influences, which has fueled a lot of the change. And a lot of the time when we learn about, in the history books, extinctions, it's all about the animals that disappeared, and they very, very seldom talk about the emergence of plant life and animal life that happens like virtually in the blink of an eye. So where turquoise comes into play, if we take that as an example of taking it one step higher than green, green is concerned about extinctions on the planet, and quite rightly so, because there are practices, sort of industrial practices that are influencing some of the extinctions, hunting practices, rituals that come right from the purple and red levels, which are influencing certain extinctions. So that has a great deal of value. But when we open it up to a much bigger level and understand it as global warming is way bigger, and that it is a cosmic relationship and confluence of the Earth and the sun and the solar system and the galaxy and the universe that is actually driving this. It's almost like looking forward to reharmonizing the planet with new species, and looking forward to the new species that are emerging as a consequence of this. And that's where I got to with the white animals, what I call the sacred white animals, that they are an indication of the genetic mutations that are fueling the higher evolutionary aspects of those species, because they are just appearing all over the planet, and there are new species already emerging. So it almost, for me, it kind of takes the stress out of looking at the state of the world, because there is a natural order that is taking place. So there is almost a, we go back to this right and wrong, there is a rightness to what is happening with the extinctions. There is a rightness to what is happening because it's waking people up to the fact that they need to respect all of life on the planet. This is everybody's home, not just their home. It belongs to the animals and all of the rest of it. And yet we can feel distressed at the wrongness of how, and the cruelty of what is happening with so many of the species that are happening. But turquoise tends to come out of that and sees it from the big, big picture. And we are there is no doubt that we are in the middle of massive evolutionary leaps. So that kind of takes the understanding from green and brings it into a whole new level. So I think sometimes when we can get wrapped up in the rights and wrongs of things, it's taking us into green, whereas suspending judgment and being able to open up to explore further can bring us into turquoise and more deeply into turquoise. And it is holding the paradox there, because it's kind of like going, well, the companies that are perpetuating cruelty, is that right or wrong? Does it mean that because we view everything as right that we don't act on it? It's like what you were saying, Bonnie, it's looking at the principles and holding the big picture and going, that actually isn't right for them to be behaving that way. So there is a voice that we can add to the system, but from a different perspective. Yeah. But understand that evolution, and that's what fascinates me, is like looking at the history and the big picture. Global warming is not just carbon dioxide levels from industry. Yes, there is a contribution, and we need to raise our voice and make people aware of that. There's a whole lot more going on. Okay, so when we look at the values of turquoise, we see somebody who is, as I said, global citizen, and that to me is almost more of a cosmic citizen, reaching for global harmony, understands the interconnectedness of nature, social relations, evolution, and business. So you take that system understanding from yellow and you evolve it to the next level. And you see the interconnectedness of everything from a much bigger perspective. And that's really, really eccentric to most people, because they can't even understand the yellow, never mind actually understanding the turquoise. It's not concerned with status or position in the world, personal status or position. It is concerned, and it values the management of the world and its resources. And it actually values diversity. And this I found really interesting at one stage, because a couple of years ago I came across a statement, and I just want to really put this in for you, is that turquoise, because it's concerned with the management of the world and its resources and understands the interconnectedness, turquoise can also be ruthless, because there is turquoise is a group value. Okay, we've gone out of the individual value of yellow back into a group value on a much bigger scale with the turquoise. And what I heard was that turquoise itself can actually be ruthless in respect of sacrificing for the greater good.
Oh.
And I went, and I'm just gonna throw that into you guys, and let you sit with it and see how you feel about that. Because turquoise understands that the management of the world and its resources is going to mean that there are going to have to be huge sacrifices in order for that new level of harmony and the interconnectedness to be worked with and realized, and for global harmony to be achieved. And it is interesting, because we can also look at the natural disasters of the world. Gaia recorrecting her course. The earthquakes, the hurricanes, those are always accompanied by huge loss of life. Are they part of the sacrifices, in a sense, that are actually being made in order for the rest of humanity to wake up and evolve to the next layer of the spiral?
It's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking, and then back to Lori thinking about Hitler, and that do souls come in knowing that that's, they've agreed to do that. I think about 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, very, very big ideas, very big values, very much sitting with paradoxes very often, but negotiating and managing the paradoxes. In the negative sense, turquoise can actually make itself inaccessible by being too abstract, because it can understand concepts that are so way beyond the general frame of thinking that they're not brought back down to earth in a very practical way. So turquoise can be very otherworldly, too abstract and very impractical, ungrounded, and can be negatively condescending to those who are not tuned in. So it takes that patronizing aspect within green to another level. It can be very condescending. So those are the sorts of things that we need to guard against as well, and we need to examine within ourselves in respect of the patterns, because we all have people within our environment that are at that yellow and or that are, you know, that are green and orange and blue and what have you, and do we actually become, and you know, and I observe that at times within myself too, and I have to be very aware of it. So it can be very condescending. What stresses turquoise is compulsive drives. Now, what that is somebody who actually almost is disconnected from their own sense of integrity. So it almost touches on the yellow, who is unintegrated within themselves, and who compulsively repeats behaviors in society, especially, you know, like organizations, kind of thing. I mean, this like really stresses me, that they are compulsively orientated towards putting figures on the bottom line, for instance. There's a compulsive drive that we actually see by the corporations, and I'm kind of going, well, can't you actually see the effect that that's actually having on anything else? And it is almost like a compulsion. So it's internal compulsive drives and external compulsive drives that are devoid of integrity and authenticity. Narrow self-serving interests, because all of those are fragmented and put things back into little boxes, and dogmas. So anything that is a dogma or that formalizes structures to such an extent, or routines to such an extent, that has little flexibility, that allows very little flexibility, is very stressing for turquoise. So don't put a turquoise individual in with a blue manager, because it ain't going to work. Okay, because you're going to get a lot of dogma. Even, you know, sort of individuals who who have their days planned in such a way that I do this at this time, and I do that at that time, and I do that at that time. You know, it's almost like being dogmatic about their own particular daily routine. And those dogmas are very blue. So turquoise represents a higher evolution from the blue and the green. And all of those are negative attributes amplified from the blues and the greens. Okay. So yeah, deep spirituality that's not necessarily related to religion. They move among social classes with relative ease because they do not identify themselves with any particular social class or grouping. Believe there is more to life than getting ahead, can be abstract and metaphysical, and they accept eccentricity among others, unless they're actually able to see through the mask, because sometimes eccentricity is really an inner statement that's coming from a lower value system and a desire to somehow try and be different. They see the macro global, they strive towards unconditional love and acceptance of others, and there you can see how that would lead into the emerging coral. Highly individualistic, unconditional pursuits. It's like, do things just purely because I want to, not because I'm driven by any outcome that I need to achieve. So there's no condition associated with the pursuits that they undertake. And I love this, walk to the beat of a different drummer. Mm-hmm. That characterizes turquoise. It's just, you walk to the beat of a different drum, and that's it. And seeing this, you begin to understand why sometimes the very old souls are not understood by others. Because you do walk to the beat of a different drum, and you absolutely meant to walk to the beat of a different drum. Can appear, I love this, possible negative, can appear annoyingly remote. It's kind of like, it almost takes that distancing of yellow to another level, because it's like, sorry, I was just on another planet. You know, so I was very remote. Okay, lack of personal space also stresses turquoise as much as it actually does yellow. They very, very much need personal space, even though they are conceptually connected with this concept and the interconnectedness of bigger communities. They need the personal space to be able to communicate through the energetic grids or through the energetic ether with that global cosmic community. They need personal space to do that. There you have, you know, the values and how they actually make decisions. They like to actually make decisions by synergizing. And long range planner is interesting because it means that turquoise can actually see. Turquoise is linked with futuristic abilities and the visionaries of the world, and they're long-range strategists. They actually can see the much bigger picture, but there's less of a stress in respect of needing something done now because they can plan for the long range. And there's the understanding that what we are doing now is sowing the seeds for something much, much longer term and bigger than where we're at right now, and highly intuitive. Okay. Any more questions, comments? Confusions? No? Okay. Very quiet. Okay, so in this document, you might just have a little bit of fun with this. There's a little cartoon strip, okay? And it's very, very interesting to do this, and we may kind of review it in the next session, is that you can go through the cartoon, you look at the language, you look at the behaviors and the interactions, and just highlight the colors or the value. So you can get a colored pen and just mark off, you know, in this one, you know, that I'm picking up a bit of purple and there's a bit of red or whatever it might be. And then we can chat about that, because it's a really lovely way of being able to integrate the understanding of the values, and it's a little bit of playtime. So I've put that in for you so you can play with it. Okay. Yep. So let's have a look. I'm going to pause that one and go back to the PowerPoint. There we go. Are we back on PowerPoint?
No.
Hasn't changed.
Hasn't it? Oh, sorry, it's still on pause. Okay, hold on. Resume.
There you go.
There we go. There we go. There we go. There we go. Right. So I'll tell you what, let's just have a little bit of fun. So here's the spiral profiles for all of you guys here. So you can actually see, Susan didn't join us today. And Susan's probably the one here that has the most blue in respect of the structure. But for the most part, within the spiral, like for instance, you can't have like very high purple with very high turquoise. You're either going to have one or the other. So this actually shows that there is a good grounding in family values and in the tribal values here. I like this because you look at this. Mariah and Natalie are the only two that have got very strong. Well, it's not even very strong. It's not. It's still actually quite low, but they've got more red in their profiles. Where's Laurie? Laurie's got some there. Yeah. I mean, I've got a bugger all, which is why, you know, when I was actually telling you that story about the woman that worked with me, who was challenging me, I really had to go in here and harness and draw it forward for everything I was worth and go, right, no more. Very, very interesting. But it just means that when you are predominant up here at the high end of this, you can go back down and you can actually pull in what you need at any particular moment in time. Also, low blue, low blue, low blue, low blue, which means you don't like too much structure. It's like really, really, there's a big need for a lot more flexibility. But you can see how the profiles are subtly different for each one in respect of the strength of each of the elements and components. I mean, here we've got Susan, who's very strong in green, emerging yellow and turquoise. Laurie, very strong in turquoise. And that makes such perfect sense in respect of the way that you think. So I think that's very evident also. And here you get, I mean, here, Mariah, you got sort of very strong green, yellow, and turquoise. So it's like all three at the high end. Also, well, it doesn't surprise me that all of us are, you know, sort of green, yellow, turquoise. It just had to be at that high end. But it is an indication of which lens. Now, I must just say this to you. Your value profile is not fixed. Your value profile is within your life at this moment in time. It shows you which lenses are governing the decisions that you take and are most prevalent. Your profile changes when you go through major shifts in your life. So you'd probably find, if because of the things that we've been through in the last 2 years, is that if this questionnaire was done 2 years ago, the profile would look different.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that I would really be curious to see what mine looked like before I went into the summer of 2016.
Yeah.
And if that was really this recalibrating.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So our profile can change. It can also change when we are confronted with situations in our lives that are probably last longer than just a single incident, where we are required to move into some of the other value systems further down the spiral, when we need to go in and harness some of those aspects. Also, where we see the low values in certain levels of the spiral, that will often be an indication of, well, not often, it can be an indication of areas where there may be immature holodynes lurking. Is there anything here that needs to be resolved? Or is it simply that we are integrating at this level and that these values are not really applicable or important at this moment in time? Because these belong to, or these are resonant with the developing soul, the young soul, the infant soul, and the baby soul at those levels of the spiral, we start going back not only within this lifetime to those relevant ages. This is early development. You know, sort of the first 4 levels take us up to the teenage years. So it's not only this life, it's also then the soul development lifetimes that we have actually had that will be influencing the level of resolution and integration that we have, and the extent to which the positive attributes of each of these levels is accessible to us. And maybe that's something that we might want to use as a question for when we go in and do the holodowns, is what level of accessibility do you have in those levels of the spiral where there is a low representation? Because if we can't access it, that says that there's an immature patterning that's lurking in there. So that's where we can do some work. And my feeling is that we all have some immature holodowns. There will be aspects of these patterns and aspects of these value systems that we haven't and don't have accessibility to, that we can actually heal through the processes that we have. Because how many of you really feel comfortable and are able to step into that red with ease?
Into what with ease?
Into the red.
Oh, the red.
Just as an example.
And the red is...
The red is that personal, it's that powerful energy that is, I want an immediate gratification.
Okay.
I want, and I want this now, kind of thing. And I'm going to test your respect. I'm going to challenge your perspective, and I'm going to test your worthiness of my respect. So you've got the printout anyway. You can actually go and have a look at the values and check through that and go, how easily accessible would these be for me if I was faced with a situation that needed this?
So the one thing that comes to mind, just, I don't know, as you're talking, for whatever reason, that I have a hard time tolerating is like when I'm driving and the person in front of me throws something out of the window of their car, like garbage. And I'm just like, how can you not get how that impacts everything? So who are those people? Because that's where I think I have an immaturity.
They would be, that's total lack of concern for the environment. They're quite likely they'd be in orange and below.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they'd be in orange and below.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that's really my biggest areas where people just have, a lack of...
It's a lack of respect for the environment. So you coming out of, sort of the greens and the green, yellow, turquoise, like saying, can you not understand the impact that is actually having? It's like using recyclable bags, just going in and buying more and more and more and more plastic when it's becoming so evident how it's destroying ocean life. And I mean, I just say, well, okay, so it's one thing about plastic. Who's dumping it in the ocean? How's it getting in there? Are there stuff that's supposed to be going to landfill that's being dumped on a container ship out at sea or something? And the other aspect I have around that as well is that corporations who make the plastic and who make the bags do it because it's cheap and that they can make more money. And yet they make it the responsibility of the consumer to actually change their behaviors, if you like, and say it's not their responsibility. And I get really angry. That's where I started. My sister said to me about 2 years ago, she says, you really have a thing about corporates, don't you? I said, yes, I do. I work for a chemical company. I know how they work. And they won't take bloody responsibility for what they churn out. They go, no, the industry wants plastic bags, we'll make plastic bags. And I'm going, no, well, stop. because then people have no option but to actually use alternatives. So yeah, there are lots of things that push buttons that we'll find. Yeah?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've been contemplating my profile, and as I think about it now, when I was taking that, there were certain questions, and now I see, and I mean, I had a feeling, but I wasn't attaching that to the colors. But on all of them, I debated which one to assign a value to. So that's part of the reason mine are like that. I think the green, yellow, and turquoise is because I would go back and forth trying to decide which one do I give the more value to? So what does that say? That I'm still sort of playing around in those levels?
No, well, it's actually still integrating. Yeah, you're right. It's integrating within these levels. If
Okay.
it's not a definite yes, 10, boom, that's it. Kind of
Right.
thing.
Okay.
There's still,
Okay.
and bear in mind, Bunny, and this is interesting, and I'm sure you don't mind. I'm not going to share the detail.
No, you're
but
fine.
From the session we did the other day, what came up in your body work was associated with this.
Right. Right.
So that's come up with a slightly higher value.
Right.
Because that's where the focus is on some of the healing that's taking place at the moment.
Okay.
You
Okay,
with
that
me?
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we also need to be aware when we are looking at these, and look, the profiles don't change that quickly. You know, it's not that you'll have a different profile tomorrow,
Right.
kind of thing, because there are a few cross checks in the questions in respect of building up the profile as well, and there's a few other things that are done, but it does mean that do this in another year or two, and you will likely have energies that have settled down into a different
Yes, absolutely.
That makes sense.
Well, it does, because I feel like so much is shifting right at this moment. So many things are integrating. Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's just a very interesting exercise to do. And what was in, and Rachel's not here, so it's just really difficult. I'll think of what I'll do is I'll have a chat with Rachel.
Yes.
Personally, because it just is nice to chat with you guys about your profiles. If there's any questions that you have, and Susan's not here either. Oh, excuse me. Are there any sort of other questions, observations in respect of? To me, there's no great surprise that this is where your energies are all focused. To see all of those. I mean, I've seen some profiles where yellow's down here. And I'm going, seriously? You know, it just is really weird. How can people not see? It just is a fact that some people are so strongly focused in one of the other colors, whatever, that yellow and turquoise is just a little strip.
Could we have yellow, like you say, way down here? Like if you took Natalie's, would it even be possible for turquoise to be that high with yellow way down where her maybe red is? Is that even possible? No. You have to go through, so you would have to go through that yellow even to get to the turquoise.
Yes, absolutely. It's that point at which the integration really, really begins. And because we keep on integrating with the global shifts that are happening with the energetic shifts, there's almost an interaction between the yellow and the turquoise that is ongoing in respect of creating new structures. And I do find this interesting from a color perspective as well, because what makes up the color turquoise is yellow and blue. So the hidden components of turquoise are yellow and blue. And this blue speaks about restructuring and formatting, and in spiral language, it's the structures of society. In color language, for instance, it is about letting go and building our divine connections, building our physical structure on the basis of more and more divine understanding and structure. So there's a huge structural element within the turquoise, and then the yellow adjustments, the personal integrity, the growth, the expansion, the effects on the nervous system through the solar plexus, the integration of all of the new energies. So there's constant interplay between the yellow and the blue, or the yellow and the turquoise. So yes, you wouldn't have very, very low yellow and yet off the chart turquoise. You'd have them together.
So it's really interesting, just a couple of things that you said, the personal integrity piece. There was a point probably about 3 or 4 years ago where I noticed I can't even say a word that isn't exactly right. It's like somebody or something stops me, and I have to, that integrity thing, everything has to be in integrity. And it was just the weirdest thing. It's like all of a sudden I can't even lie, even if I want to, or even say a word that's like I'll sit and search and search and search for the right word to fit in there. And so that was 3 or 4 years ago. But then now this, you said the letting go of, the way I took what you said was letting go of maybe some of, I mean, even, I don't know, whatever, but a couple years, like 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, I would say, I went into that letting go of it, and maybe that was going into the
That's with the
turquoise.
turquoise as well, because the turquoise is more abstract.
Yeah.
And it's in that abstract energy, you start really sort of moving into different ways of languaging. It's understanding, for instance, language of light, and geometry, and understanding different aspects of language. So yeah, it is kind of letting go into more of that divine flow. Yeah, very good. Yes, it's interesting to observe. And to then go into the spiral aspects and the profile and go, okay, so now you've got the profile, now you can actually go back from a cognitive conscious perspective rather than a feeling. Yeah, I feel I don't have this, or I feel as if I don't have that, whatever. It's like, take your profile and then go back through each layer of the spiral and then look at how you want to actually focus, or would like to focus your holodyne work in respect of clarifying and healing within each of those levels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So with all of that, we've had 2 hours together. So how does that feel in respect of giving you something to work with for the next 2 weeks?
Good.
Although it is Christmas, we won't get together again until, oh my goodness, oh God, I forgot. How can I forget, Bonnie?
I know, really.
Bonnie's got Christmas clocks and Christmas decorations. Yeah, I'm really enjoying that all of the purple traditional stuff, because you see where mine sits. Yeah. So we're not going to get together until the weekend after Christmas. Our final one is going to be seeing us into the new year. It's going to be on the 30th. So if you get an opportunity to work with each other, or you might just want to sit in contemplation with your profiles and the information that you've got, do your own script or use the recorded version of the script, whatever feels comfortable for you, until we gather again in 2 weeks' time, which will be our final one. And because we've gone through all of the information, hopefully we will be able to do some cohesive, what's the word, holodyne work as a group when we get together the next time. How's that?
Sounds good.
Sound good?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All done. Thank you, ladies. Love you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you, all of you.
You're wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah, all of you. Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Oh, yeah. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Have a wonderful time.
Yes. Enjoy. Thank you, Julie.
Okay. Much, much
Good
love.
to see you all.
Good to see you all too.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
How do I stop this?
Leave meeting.